Boa tarde a todos. A gente vai dar continuidade no minicurso do professor Elipe. A segunda parte agora, que é a dinâmica do problema de dois corpos com perturbações radiais. Por favor, professor. Obrigada.
Obrigado, Alessandra. Well, the topic of this seminar and of the next one will be the dynamics of two-body problem with radial perturbation. I think that everyone knows from general mechanics during the degree that the central forces are functions, are forces that depends only on the radial distance. And the simplest way to express that is that the acceleration, the second derivative with respect to the time, is equal to the force that depends only on r, and this means the norm or the modulus of the radial vector. And we find many examples of this type of motion in physics and in particular in celestial mechanics. For instance, the Kepler problem is one of these type. The Hooke law, that is when we have one spring, the harmonic motion of the a particle attached to one spring that goes far, comes, goes far, and so on. This also is one central force. And also there are some examples taking into account the relativistic effects, for instance, to explain the precession of the perihelion of Mercury, relativistic potential, like the Manev potential, then instead of being the Keplerian is something over r, these potentials are something over r to the square, or even the Schwarzschild potential that are of the type 1 over r to the cube. So these two are very common in relativity. So in particular, we will deal with what is called quasi-Keplerian motions. That means that the Hamiltonian, the problem is made by the Hamiltonian of the Kepler problem plus some terms is of each one depends on the inverse of a power of the radial distance. Means will be something over r to the square, over r to the cube, over r to the 4, and so on, depending on the number that we have here. So we will try to find the solution of this type of motion, and only as particular cases we will consider 3 problems. So let's recall the main problem in artificial satellite theory. That consists in the motion of a satellite around the Earth, but taking into account only the J2 effect in the solar problem. We truncate the series expansion of the potential, and we consider only the terms that contains this term, the J2, that is a kind of the flatness of the Earth, of the planet, of the satellite. A set of variables, canonical variables, that is very useful to deal with this problem is the so-called Whittaker variables, and also known as polar nodal variables. That consist in 3 variables and 3 moments, the conjugate moments, in such a way that r is already defined, the radial distance. Theta is the angle between the argument of the perigee plus the true anomaly, so it will be omega plus f. And nu is the node, the angle of the node. The right ascension of the ascending node is the correct word for that. And the conjugate moments are capital R is the radial velocity, capital theta is the norm of the angular momentum, and capital N is the projection of the angular momentum over the third axis. So this will be theta cosine the inclination. That is either this angle or the inclination. So I think that everyone is familiar with this type of coordinates, no problem with that. Okay, so with this set of canonical variables, it is possible to express the Hamiltonian that will consist in the Keplerian plus this term. You see that the Keplerian problem that is called H0 is now depends on capital R, capital theta, capital R. Mu is the gravitational constant in the mass, and H1 is just the coefficient J2 with all that is multiplied. P2 is of this expression is the Legendre polynomial of degree 2, and this is a quotient between the planet equatorial radius and the distance. Usually, this is very small because otherwise the satellite will be impacted with the Earth or the planet. So this is bigger than the numerator, so this quantity is small, is to the square, and this so is something to r to the cube that is usually very small. This is why this is considered a perturbation, because besides J2 is very small in the case of the Earth, is 0.001. So we call epsilon is a small parameter, something that is much more smaller than 1. And this is the main problem. Well, the main problem is very simple, but is not integrable. It was proved 30, 40 years ago by Carles Simó and Irigoyen that is not integrable. What does it mean? That means that the solution cannot be expressed in terms of elementary function. This is the definition of non-integrable. So, to have the solution, we have to go numerical integration or analytical theories based on perturbation methods. So now I am going to describe briefly one of these perturbation methods that is very useful and has been employed extensively in artificial satellite theory. I don't know if you are familiar with the PRI method, all of you. Well, some. Don't pay much attention to the technique, just pay attention on what is trying to solve, okay? So, it was this method invented by de Prix and was published in the first issue of the Celestial Mechanics in the 1969. And de Prix called that the Lie method because he had the opinion that no result will be attributed with the name of the author until the author is dead. So he still was alive, and Sophus Lie died 1 century ago, who said, okay, I pull Lie, because Sophus Lie did something similar the first step, but not all of that. Okay, so a Lie transformation is one parameter family of mappings that from a set of canonical variables to another set of canonical variables, and this is the parameter. Okay, depending on the parameter, we will have one family, another of transformations. And this family of mappings is defined by the solutions of a Hamiltonian. Are the Hamilton equations. Here, epsilon plays the role of the time, and omega plays the role of the Hamiltonian. In fact, it's a Hamiltonian. But it's none of the previous Hamiltonian. It's something different. And the solution is a differential equation, so we must put some initial conditions. And the initial conditions is that when epsilon is equal to 0, x coincides with y, and capital X coincides with capital Y. So if there is no perturbation, both sets of variables are the same. And this capital omega, calligraphic omega, is a formal power series. It has the structure of a Hamiltonian, and that depends on that. Notice that here is n and here is n plus 1. And this is called the generator of the Lie transformation. So if we know omega, we will have the transformation between x and y on y and x. And this is a completely canonical transformation. So we will have canonical variables, we will have canonical variables with no remainder. Okay, so let's apply the method. Let's suppose that we have a Hamiltonian that depends on x, y, and epsilon, and it is a series in terms of the small parameter. Of the small parameter. So the transformation acts over this Hamiltonian in such a way that the result will be a new series. So if this is the solution of the previous equation, the image of this Hamiltonian will be something replacing x and capital X by y and capital Y and epsilon. And the result is capital K, that depends on the new variables, depends on epsilon. And because that for epsilon equal to 0, the transformation are the identity between the x and y, the first coefficient doesn't modify. It's exactly the same, but instead of being in terms of x, it's in terms of y. And the rest is something new. And in the series will be, since this is Hamiltonian in this case, this will be with K. And the main result of the Lie method is that this new Hamiltonian, that with K's, instead of this series, satisfy an inductive relation of this type, where this is the Poisson bracket. Here is the definition of the Poisson bracket, that is the gradient with respect to the coordinates times the gradient with respect to the first, the gradient with respect to the moments with respect to of the second term of the Poisson bracket, minus the same, but here with moment and here with coordinates. So this is the Poisson bracket of that. I guess all of you know that. Also, this is known as a Lie derivative because it's a derivation. Okay. So here, this is the first term. These are the terms of the generating function of the generator. This is the new Hamiltonian, and here appears something new. And who is that? Well, there are many of these terms. So this is linear combination of nested Poisson brackets involved all the previous thing. So this is this is called the homologic equation. And the merit of the the pre-method is that he gives a way to compute that in a systematic and not very difficult way to do. Another thing that is important is that when we apply a general theory of perturbation by means of Lie transformation, this is known. This is the original Hamiltonian. In our case will be the Hamiltonian of the main problem. But we don't know neither K, neither the generators. These two things are unknowns. And there is a frequent error for people that don't use Lie transformation that when they explain because appear in some programs and they have to explain the pre-method, they feel only that they must satisfy this expression, the homologic equation, and they say that, okay, if we know this, we know this, we know this, there are a combination of these things, we know the new Hamiltonian. This is right, but it's not useful, because what is useful for the method is we know this, and we assign some value to this for the new Hamiltonian. It's such a way that if we choose who will be the new Hamiltonian according to our needs. Maybe an integrable problem, maybe not integrable but simpler than the original problem, or maybe it's not simpler than the original problem but contains some properties that will be useful for us. Okay? The idea of the Lie method is not to obtain the Hamiltonian, is the new Hamiltonian, is let's find the generator, the omega, in such a way that the homologic equations satisfy that for our interest, for what we want to reach, the new Hamiltonian, satisfy the homologic equation. So it's not to find K, it's to find K and find the generator, the generating function. Okay? And this is the Q of the pre-method. That is that the way in obtaining these intermediate terms that appear before, this A, may be obtained in a systematic way by means of what the people call Lie triangle. I copy from another paper the expression because it was a lot of work just to type in LaTeX all these arrows. And up to now, H was the original Hamiltonian and K the new Hamiltonian. Here, the new Hamiltonian will be F00 plus this epsilon this plus epsilon to the square this plus epsilon to the square that. That means that these are the terms in the series of the original Hamiltonian. The second number is 0, okay? So that means that this is the original Hamiltonian. And the new Hamiltonian will be all that, where the first number is 0, the 0, 0, 0, okay? So this corresponds to the old Hamiltonian, and this will correspond to the new Hamiltonian. So this is known because it's the problem, and this is something that we choose with some limitations, but we choose because the new Hamiltonian will be of our interest, because we simplify our lives. And we need to compute all these terms that are inside the Hamiltonian, the triangle. But it's easy because to have one, we need to know what happens before by means of this formula. For instance, let's compute F21. So for that, we need what is to the left and what is in the diagonal on top of this number. So F21 will be F30, that is this, plus the Poisson bracket of F20 with respect to omega 1, this term with respect to omega 1, plus 2 F1 Poisson bracket of F10 with respect to omega 2, plus this one. Okay? But to compute that, we need to know the first term of the generating function, the second term of the generating function, and the third term of the generating function. But the omega 1 will be by solving this, the omega 2 will be by solving that, and the omega 3 by solving all that. Okay? So we compute, and so we go to that. If we need to compute this term, so that will be this. So we go to the left and then following the diagonal. And in that way, we will be able to compute all the transformation. At the same time, we compute this intermediate term that will be necessary just to obtain the generating function. And also, these are terms that we are putting for our convenience. You catch the idea? Yeah, more or less. Things looks very simple, but very, very complicated. So, by applying these techniques of perturbation, the main problem of the artificial satellite was converted in other problems that are called the intermediaries. What does this mean? An intermediary is a new Hamiltonian of the original problem that contains some simplifications, something that will be easier either to integrate or much simpler than the other, but also that contains most of the characteristics of the original problem. Okay? So the first intermediary that we have is the one given by Brouwer in the 1959. And this intermediary appeared in terms of two variables, r and the angle theta. So this is not a radial intermediary because it contains this angle. And this has been extensively used just at the beginning of the space era. I think that this was published in the Astronomical Journal in the 59. 2 years later than the launch of the first satellite, and has been very useful. There are more, but the most conspicuous are these three. Cid, that was my professor at the University of Zaragoza, obtained an intermediary that depends only of r. So this is called radial intermediary, and the perturbation is multiplied by 1 over r to the cube. Notice that these two intermediaries were obtained not by using the Lie method, but were obtained by using either the Poincaré transformation or the von Simpel method. There are not easy to handle because it combines the old coordinates and the new moments in one side, and in the other side combines the new coordinates and the old moments. So while the Desprez method is a direct transformation between the new and the old variables. So this is why it's to implement even an algebraic manipulator is much easier. Because the pre-published his method in the 69. And in the 81 gives the pre-obtained another intermediary in such a way that the perturbation is of the type 1 over r to the square. Things look easier, very easy. Apply the method and obtain that. Well, this paper, I think, is around 70 pages long. Okay? But we don't care about how they obtained that. We know that by means of this type of transformation, it is possible to convert the main problem in this type of Hamiltonians. So we are Hamiltonians on the same type as I put in the first slide, that was quasi-Keplerian Hamiltonians. So this is the expression of the third Hamiltonian. It's the Keplerian plus epsilon, one term that contains the sign of the inclination. I remind that the cosine of the inclination is capital theta over capital N. So here depends only on moment. So in fact, this is a pure radial intermediary. The one given by Desprez is of this similar to that, depends on the moments. P is the parameter of the ellipse. Alpha is the radius of the equatorial radius, and this there is more or less the same, like here. So we can put all together in this aspect. So where this will be or 0 or 1, if this is 0, this must be, we have the fifth intermediary, and if this is 0, we have the Desprez intermediary. So in one formula, we may have the two. And what is important is there are quasi-Keplerian, a Keplerian plus epsilon, something depending on over r to the square or over r to the third. Let's see another application, another problem where we will find radial intermediary, radial Hamiltonian. And this has to do with the closed binary stars. You know that the binary star is the dynamical problem of two bodies, stars, that if we look at them, we see that one is very close to the other. Not yet, because by perspective, one might be here, the other may be here, and if we look from here, we will see as if they were very close one another. But one is to one distance and the other far away. This is not a double star, or a binary star. A binary star is when both are close, one here and the other here, in such a way that they attract each one by the Newton law and describe orbits around their mutual center of mass or the relative motion of one with respect to another. So this is the binary star. Classification of binary stars. The main classification is that we may talk about optical pairs, optical binary stars. That means that we detect that they are binary by looking at them with telescope, optical telescope. And this has been the classical, or the origin of binary star with the classical. There is a system of measure on the center of the telescope, so we can see the angular distance between them and also the orientation with respect to one origin of angles. We can see if it is here or are inclined one with respect to another, and also if this is short or longer. And these are the two quantities that may be obtained by observation plus the time at which the observation is made. What things can we deduce from the binary stars? Optical. 7 orbital elements. In general, the orbital elements, when we are talking about the moon with respect to the Earth, or a satellite with respect to the Earth, we are talking only about 6 orbital elements. In that case, there is another one because the mu, I mean the masses of the stars are unknown. Okay, so if we are able to solve the problem that is computed the 7 orbital elements, we will know the sum of the 2 masses of the stars. And this is the main goal of studying or finding the orbit of a binary star, is just to have an idea of the mass of the pair. The other type of double stars, there are the spectroscopic. That means that it's detected that this is a pair of double stars by means of the variation of the radial velocity, because if one is moving around the other, when you find the spectrum of the star, you see that the Fraunhofer lines move periodically either to the left or to the right, and so on. So that means that the one star is going farther or closer to us. So it's possible to detect the radial velocity at which they are moving each other. So with that, the number of parameters are different, but it's possible to have not the mass, but the projection of the mass. I mean, the mass cosine the inclination. It's not possible to obtain the inclination alone. But if we combine both techniques, the visual and the spectroscopic, it is possible to have not only the sum of the mass, but the individual mass of each component. So this is very, very important to have that. And there is a new one that is the photometric, because is the method to deduce that it is a double star is by looking at the variation of the intensity of the light that we receive. And usually these are known as eclipsing binary stars. That means that one cross just in front of our visual, in front or behind, making the orbit one around the other, but in such a way that since the intensity of the two stars usually are different, what happens is that when is in front, when they are separate, we receive the light of both stars. When one is in front of us, we receive less light, and when it's behind, we'll receive even less light. So, but it's a continuous oscillation. So we have the period in the passage, and by means of that, it's possible to obtain a lot of information. And also another thing that can be obtained from the study of binary stars, beside the mass, is the distance. You know that the distance in the stars usually is called parallax. You know that? Well, when the distance is obtained by means of that, is called the dynamical parallax. Well, combining of that, it's possible to obtain a lot of information about that. So let's see one special case of photometric star system, that is the Algol system. It's made by two stars, Algol A, Algol B, are very, very close, and one move around the other in such a way that grows in front or behind, and the light is oscillating. In fact, this is not, properly speaking, a binary system. It's a triple system, because there is another star that is called Algol C that also is attracted by these two. So it's a problem of three bodies. But this is very far, and these are very close, so it's made the assumption that this does not alter or modify the motion of these two, so this is a kind of restricted three-body problem. But we are not interested today in the restricted three-body problem. This was for the previous day. So we forget about that. This doesn't exist for us. What is important is that in this year, 2009, appeared this article in Astrophysical Journal, in which it is possible to have this figure. It's the first time that two close stars are captured in a picture separately. And not only separately, but you see that they are not spherical points, but this is elongated. And even this is elongated. Why? Because one star is not a rigid body. It's a deformable body, and there is the tide effect that the mass of the star is attracted also by the other star. The same as happens with the air, with the tides. It's attracted by the sun and by the moon, and with the solid air, nothing happens. Well, it happens, but so far we don't care about that. We will fish only in the ocean, the water of the ocean, and this is why we have the tides. We have high tides, low tides, and so on, because of the attraction of the other body. So with the stars, happen the same. Probably this has a bigger mass than the other, so attract more than the other, and this is why this is deformed, and the same happens here. It's important, this picture, that the deformation is going to that. And also the deformation of this is in the direction of the center of mass of the other. Well, in the same paper appeared this beautiful picture. We see the pixels of this will be Algol B, the one that was deformed, more or less. This is pixelated figure, irregular. So the authors say that, well, the more logical will be something of this type. And this is an ellipse, but since we see only the projection, this will be the projection of one ellipsoid. Okay? So let's talk about the potential of one ellipsoid. So we model that. In fact, all that is part of one paper that we are sent to Astronomical Journal. Let's suppose that we have one rigid body here. Don't care about the shape, whatever shape. Another rigid body here. We take one point here, O1, O2. In principle, maybe whatever points we choose. But we will see later that things will be simpler if we put O1 in the center of mass of the body and O2 in the center of mass of the second body. This will be R12, means the distance between the two center of mass, and this will be in this direction the vector. We take one point P1 here, another point Pk here. The index I means for the first body and K for the second body. So what is the attraction between P1 and Pk? So it will depend on the mutual distance. It's a Keplerian attraction of the mutual distance. This is the vector of the mutual distance. And we do the following. We take this line and we trace parallel to this line or to this vector, but started on O1. So this is parallel to other, and this will be this point, okay? So this is the same distance, but here we have in this triangle the distance between P1 and R is called Ri to the origin. This is delta I, and this will be theta I. And the same here will be delta, theta, and also this angle from the new point that we invented, just putting the parallel. There will be psi ik, and there will be rho ik. So the distance, instead of computing here, we compute from here. So it will be this vector, and this angle. So the theorem of the cosine. We take r to the square outside, so we have 1 plus something cosine plus something to the square, and this is the quotient between these two quantities. Notice that this is one distance inside the body, and this is the distance between the two central masses. So this is much smaller than this one, so this quantity will be less than 1. Now we put with delta, the vector delta 0, the unit vector in this direction. So it will be a unit vector in this direction, or translated will be the unit vector in that direction. And with this, the projection of this over the vector r over this vector will be r cosine, and with the other will be r cosine. And by means of with respect to the other vector that remains, will be minus, because delta is in that direction, and this is over will be pi minus psi. So this rho cosine with a minus. More things. So we have this, we square, we put separately, putting cosine to the square like 1 minus sine square, but r to the sine is this quantity, delta, and the same with k will be minus delta to the square. So with all that, now we are able to compute 1 over the distance between these 2 points. That will be 1 over that, the square root of that. Okay? This is the same expression. And we know that when this is less than 1, we can expand the square root in terms of the Legendre polynomials of the first kind. Legendre polynomials are defined as this expression with the derivatives of certain order. But what is nice of them is that they satisfy a recurrent relation in such a way that if we know one polynomial and the previous, we are able to compute the next one by means of this polynomial. It's easy to check that P0 is equal to 1 and P1 is equal to C. So by means of this recurrent relation, we are able to produce all the collection of Legendre polynomials. So now we have that, but that is the distance between 2 points, one of one body, another of the other body. If we want to know what is the total potential, we have to integrate over one body, over the other body. I mean that this is a triple integral. This will be a triple integral, triple integral of this expression. So we have a series that will be a series of some coefficients, some terms Vn. So this will be the different terms of the series of the potential. So let's compute the first term. The first term, this was equal to 1. So this is constant, it goes out. So eventually we have this. So it's the integral of the mass with respect to S1, is the mass of the first body, and the second integral is the mass of the second body. So we have precisely the Keplerian term. Go to the V1. So we have to put to the 1, but this term was cosine of psi because the Lagrange P1 is the variable. And we have to integrate these two. Okay, now we use all these expressions that we computed apparently with no sense. Well, but this is that. I think this must not be here. This will be the difference between that and that. But this is the unit vector along the line of the center of masses that does not depend on the shape of the body, so goes out of the integral. The same here. And here we have this vector times that minus this vector times that. What is that? This is precisely the center of mass of the body S2. But we said that we put the origin in the center of mass, so that means that this vector, this integral is 0. And this, by the same reason, this also is 0. So that means that this is null. So far, we compute dot, two terms, one the Keplerian and the other is null. Let's go to the third one. So the third one, we have 2 to the square, and this that will be 3 to the square minus 1. So we compute more or less the same by making use of the same quantities. So we have this expression, that expression. Here there are some simplification because this is equal to 0 by the same consideration that this may go out of the Hamiltonian, of the integral, and eventually B2 is all that. Now we make a parenthesis. No, not yet. Yes. Okay, with this term, with the r to the square with plus the r to the square, these are the moments of inertia of each body. Okay? So when we add the two, we have that these quantities that appear here is the sum of the moment of inertia A plus B plus C, the moment of inertia of the body. And these quantities that appear also in the formula with delta, you see that we have here delta and delta. These are precisely the moment of inertia of the body of one body with respect to the line joining the body 1 and the body 2. Okay, so these quantities are the moment of inertia of this solid with respect to the line joining the center of masses. So eventually, our third term in the expansion will be the Keplerian plus this plus this. These are very similar, but here we have M1, and these are things related with the second body, and this we have M2, and these are related with the third body. And this quantity we may put in another way, because this is the definition of that is A to alpha to the square plus B beta to the square plus C gamma to the square, where alpha, beta, gamma are the direction cosines of the axis. Okay? And the sum of alpha square plus beta square plus gamma square is equal to 1, so we can eliminate one of that. For instance, here we eliminate beta, okay? Because alpha beta square will be 1 minus alpha square minus gamma square. So what appears here and what appears here, we are able to put in that direction, depending only in the moments of inertia and two of the direction cosines. Okay, so that's in general. I don't know, maybe you already knew, because in some places, well, do you explain that in the degree or not? These things are explained in the degree, the potential of the rigid bodies. Okay. So more of you were familiar with it. So let's go now to the problem that were two stars that were close and they were ellipsoids. So if they are ellipsoid and they are attracted by the tide effect, the deformation will be in the direction of to the other. So we have one ellipsoid and here another ellipsoid, different, okay, or on size. So this will be the x-axis, that will be the y-axis, and this will be the z-axis. So they are pointing along the y direction. The y direction. So for these two bodies, we apply the previous computations. Well, this is what, because one of the who made more studies about these problems of motions to bodies, spherical or spheroids, he called that spheroid was Duboshin, Russian. The papers are around the 60s, 70s. And he called when in M bodies, when they were pointing all along them, or if we have another here, this will be here, the other here, and the other in that direction. This configuration he called a spoke. A spoke means the radius, think of a bicycle, the wheel of the bicycle. So the spoke are the radius. In Spanish we say radio, el radio de la rueda, the radius. But apparently in English it takes the name of a spoke. Yeah, so this is, but in Portuguese, you don't have bicycle. but she has bicycle, but static. No, arrow is something that you throw. The three configurations of Dubocin were, the simplest was float. That was like a spheroid. It was flattened. They were floating on the on water. Okay, this was the float configuration. This was the spoke, and also he has the arrow, and the arrow is to have this not oriented like that, but perpendicular, like it were an arrow that was thrown by that. Okay, so this is the spoke configuration. Okay, so this is the Hamiltonian. So now we have to apply that we are in an ellipsoid. So what is A, B, and C in one ellipsoid, and also what is that? It's very simple, and eventually we obtain that this quantities is only twice A minus B. Why? Because the direction cosine of this direction that coincides with one of the Cartesian body, the Cartesian axis, with respect to the axis, this is 90 degrees, so the cosine will be 0. With respect to the C will be 0, and the angle is 0. The cosine will be equal to 1. So cancel many terms for that. And also there is a symmetry, so there is no terms in C, because this will be exactly the same as this. This is the result. So our potential is the Keplerian Hamiltonian plus 1 times epsilon 1 over r to the cube. And epsilon depends only on the semi-major axis, and in fact as the difference of the semi-major axis of each ellipsoid. Usually this will be small, and also is divided by r to the cube, so this term is much smaller than this one. So we see that for a problem like the double stars, eventually we got a quasi-Keplerian problem. And it's exactly the same expression as in the de Broglie intermediary. So all that you know from the de Broglie intermediary, we can apply to this problem. And that's all for today. Next day we will try to solve that, the question, the motion, to see how is the motion. Thank you. Are questions or something that you...
Is there a limitation when I use the PMF? A limitation in terms of eccentricity like that? Can I use it for all values of the eccentricity, for example?
I cannot hear with the noise of that.
Okay. Is there a limitation in the free method
For what?
for in terms of the orbital elements?
No.
No limitation.
No
Just
limitation.
for-
Okay. The only limitations will be the essential singularities of the problem. Okay? So, for instance, if the eccentricity is 0, you will be in trouble because you cannot define the angle, the perigee angle, and so on. But it's a matter of changing of variables. For instance, to take e cosine, I don't remember, and the other variable e sine something. You change variables, so you convert the Hamiltonian in other method that is free, singularity free. Otherwise, it will be valid for whatever.
More questions? No? Thank you, Elipe.
Okay. Thank you to you.